You know, when we think about a military retreat, the image that usually comes to mind is, well, it's chaos, right? A total collapse, a chaotic flight from a superior enemy. But what if that's not the whole story? What if a retreat wasn't a failure, but a weapon system in its own right? Today, we're going to break down one of the most desperate military actions in history, Paraguay's Great Retreat of 1869. We're going to see how a nation chose to destroy its own infrastructure in a calculated, brutal bid for survival.
Just try to put yourself in this situation for a second. You're a Paraguayan soldier. That bridge in front of you, it's not just some strategic target on a map. It's part of your home. Maybe your family even helped build it. And now your orders are to tear it down, not to win a battle, not to take some hill, but just to buy your nation maybe one more day.
And that's the brutal question at the heart of what we're talking about today. It seems like a paradox, doesn't it? We're going to unpack the cold, hard logic behind this seemingly self-destructive plan. And we're going to look at it not as a chaotic withdrawal, but as a carefully engineered, mobile defensive system.
All right, here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll set the stage, looking at the absolutely dire situation Paraguay was in. Then we'll get into how they basically invented a new kind of war, creating a literal void to stop their enemy. We'll look at how they turned the landscape itself into a weapon, and how all this paralyzed the invading alliance. And finally, we'll connect it all to military strategy today.
So, by 1869, the Paraguayan War had been grinding on for 5 unbelievably brutal years. The country was pushed to its absolute breaking point. It was facing the combined power of Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay, the Triple Alliance. Let's be clear, a conventional military victory was completely off the table. It just wasn't going to happen.
The reality on the ground was just grim. The army was a shadow of its former self. They were outnumbered on a massive scale, and trying to defend territory the old-fashioned way was pure suicide. So the whole strategic goal shifted. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about making sure the nation of Paraguay still existed when the dust settled. Survival was the only objective left.
And this, right here, is the critical pivot. This is where the Paraguayans shift to a totally different way of thinking. The commanders realize something profound. If you can't beat the enemy's army in a straight-up fight, you have to beat their progress. You have to go after their logistics, their momentum, their ability to even move forward.
This really lays it out perfectly. They just threw out the rulebook on positional warfare. Holding ground, fighting big battles. They switched to something completely different. Time delay warfare. The new goal wasn't about killing enemy soldiers. It was about killing enemy time. Every single hour the alliance was stuck in the mud was another hour that Paraguay existed.
So how'd they actually do it? Well, this wasn't just random vandalism. It was an absolute masterpiece of tactical sabotage. A really precise process of creating these strategic voids where the enemy expected to find roads and bridges and supplies.
The whole thing was incredibly methodical. Step 1. Find a critical choke point, a single bridge over a deep ravine, or a narrow mountain pass. Step 2. Don't just blow it all up. Instead, you surgically remove one single critical piece. That move creates a huge engineering problem for the advancing army, forcing them to just stop. They have to halt everything, bring up their engineers, and figure out a solution from scratch.
Okay, now this is where it gets really, really clever. This is the counterintuitive genius of the whole strategy. If you just demolish a bridge and leave a giant pile of rubble, the Alliance army can actually use that rubble as a foundation. They can build a temporary crossing pretty quickly. But what if you surgically remove the main span, leaving a clean, impassable gap? Well, you've just created a much bigger, more complex problem for their engineers. So get this, destroying less was actually more effective.
And this whole idea of creating voids wasn't just about blowing up bridges and roads. The Paraguayans started to look their entire country, the rivers, the mountains, the forests, as just one big weapon to be used against the alliance.
I mean, they were literally terraforming their own country into a giant defensive weapon system. They'd dam up streams to flood valleys the alliance had to cross. They'd trigger rock slides to block up mountain passes. They burned fields. They burned shelters, denying the enemy food and rest. And by doing all this, they basically forced a huge alliance army into these narrow, predictable paths where they were weakest.
So, what was the bigger picture here? What was the real effect of all these individual acts of sabotage? Well, by itself, a destroyed bridge or a flooded road might just be an annoyance. But when you add them all up, they started a chain reaction, a cascading logistical paralysis that spread across the entire alliance army.
And this is a perfect illustration of how it all added up. A delay at a bridge in week 1 means that the supply wagons are late in week 3. So when the frontline troops get stuck at another blocked pass in week 6, they're now dangerously cut off from their supplies, which are stuck way back down the road. You see? Dozens of these little delays just compounded and compounded, grinding the massive Alliance war machine to a halt.
And you can see the result right here. The difference between what the Alliance planned to do and what they actually did was just enormous. Every single inch of ground they took cost them an insane amount, not so much in casualties, but in the one resource they could never get back: time.
So here's the key takeaway. Paraguay's greatest weapon wasn't its army, which was basically gone. It was absence. The absence of a bridge, the absence of a clear road, the absence of food. They were fighting by strategically taking things away from the battlefield.
Now, you might think this idea of fighting with absence was just some desperate one-off tactic from the 19th century, but it's not. In fact, it was an early, brutal look at a major concept in modern military strategy.
And that concept is called anti-access/area denial, or A2AD for short. The whole point of A2AD is to make it so incredibly difficult or costly for an enemy to even get into a certain area, on land, at sea, or in the air, that they either decide it's not worth it, or if they do try, they can't operate effectively.
And that's exactly what Paraguay did. Using the basic tools they had, shovels, some explosives, and fire, they created one of history's first and maybe most desperate A2/AD zones. They used the destruction of their own country to deny physical access to the Alliance and to make it impossible for them to operate.
So this is what it all boils down to. When we look back at the Great Retreat, we shouldn't see a panicked mob running for their lives. No, we should see a deliberate, if unbelievably costly, military operation. One designed to trade space and roads and bridges for the one thing they needed more than anything else: time.
Which leaves us with a final, really tough question to think about. For that soldier who was ordered to destroy a bridge his own family helped build, for a nation that literally unbuilt itself to survive, what is the real price of buying just one more day?